Hello and welcome to another episode of TV on TV. I'm State Representative Tommy Vitolo. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. We've got a great episode today. We've got Jake Auchincloss, candidate for the MA4 congressional seat. I'm going to interview him, about a 25-minute interview. It's a great shot. It's a great interview. Before that, of course, we want to go through some state and local changes, COVID-related or not, as we do every week. And I want to remind you, it's wicked hot, so please be careful. Try to stay indoors in the shade, in the cool. Be really thoughtful about being exposed to heat. Please be safe. The legislature's been very busy. I've got a lot to go over, so we'll get right into it. On Friday last week, the House passed a police reform bill following over 30 hours of debate. It was a difficult debate. There are strong emotions, and we really do want to move forward on this. It's clear that reform is necessary and appropriate, and there's not always agreement on just how much reform. So here's what the legislature did. The legislature passed a bill, the House, that included all four of the state-level priorities expressed by the Black and Latino Legislative Caucus. That includes creating a professional licensing system for police officers. If this becomes law, all police officers will need to be licensed and they can have their license revoked. This is commonly called POST. It also created an Office of Diversity and Equal Opportunity, created a commission to study institutional and structural racism, not just in policing, but in our entire criminal justice system. And it set clear limits on use of force, including the prohibition of chokeholds and further restrictions on the use of tear gas and no-knock warrants. It also had several other reforms and positive steps, including a review of the civil service system, a committee to create standards around body and dash camera use, data storage, privacy, and so forth. It did not make meaningful changes to qualified immunity. And I know that's something many people wanted, other people were very concerned about. It did create a committee to study, and I think this is not a study to kill, but really what should qualified immunity look like for police officers and for other civil servants going forward? Clearly more work to do. It also made it explicitly illegal and with a severe penalty for a police officer to have sexual intercourse with someone in custody. And it also made it illegal for a police officer to falsify his or her timesheets. There were quite a few contentious amendments. Two that I'll highlight is an amendment that would restrict no-knock warrants when there are children or elderly expected to be present. That passed by an 83-76 vote. That was a close vote. An amendment to prohibit the use of tear gas failed 38-121. In both cases, I voted in the affirmative. Again, the first one became part of the bill. The second one did not. Ultimately, the bill passed 93-66, which is a rather close vote for a bill in the House. On Monday and Tuesday, we took up economic development, which is a collection of different items: zoning reform, sports betting, and a variety of direct and indirect spending to help stimulate the economy. The zoning reform is important, and it's tricky, and it's a little bit technical. Essentially, the House passed the governor's housing choice bill more or less intact, which means that if a community wants to upzone, that is, change the zoning to allow for more density, it now only needs a 50% majority to change that law rather than the historic 2/3. Downzoning, zoning to make things less dense, still requires the 2/3. There are a variety of other details, but that's really the one that I think people are most focused on. We got some earmarks, which I'm not going to get into. There was also a movement to allow for a real estate transfer tax for any municipality to opt in. And of course, Brookline's town meeting expressed overwhelmingly that it would like to. That amendment failed 29-130. Representing Brookline, I voted in favor. but there's nowhere near enough votes. And so I think that issue may quiet down for a while. We will see. Yesterday, the House voted to dramatically expand the use of telehealth, wherein patients can use a telephone, Zoom, a variety of different mechanisms to communicate with doctors and other healthcare providers around healthcare issues. Prior to COVID, telehealth was largely restricted, but because of the physical distancing necessary under COVID, the governor expanded the use of telehealth with his emergency powers, and it turns out it's popular. It's popular with medical providers, it's popular with insurers, and it's popular with patients. Now, this does not mean you can use telehealth for everything. In general, you have to already have an established relationship with that healthcare provider around that issue. But the details matter. It's not the law yet, and if it does become the law, you'll want to go ahead and work out those details with your healthcare provider. But it is an opportunity for lower cost and higher access to care for a variety of circumstances, and that's a really positive thing. That passed 158-0. Today and tomorrow, the House will be taking up an energy and environment bill. It is also the mix of several bills, primarily Joan Moschino's Roadmap to 2050 bill, which incidentally is a step off of former State Representative Frank Smizek's work, and really exciting stuff. I have no doubt that it will pass. The question will be in the amendments, how will we change the details? And that remains to be seen. So without further ado, you're watching Brookline Interactive Group, and we're going to cut over to the interview I recorded just a day or two ago with Jake Auchincloss, candidate for the Massachusetts 4th Congressional District. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week. Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Representative Tommy Vitolo, and I'm here with Newton City Councilor and Massachusetts Congressional District 4 candidate, Jake Auchincloss. And we've got another great interview today. Jake, thanks for coming. I know you're so busy, and also a new father, which is marvelous, and I'm absolutely tickled for you. And so let's really dive right in. Tell us what you've been up to since, like, from birth until early last year. Tell us a little bit about where you're coming from.
Well, first, Tommy, thanks for having me on. As you said, this is the home stretch of the campaign, busy times, thrilled to be here. I'm a Marine veteran, city councilor in Newton, and recently a new dad. In fact, I'm actually camping out in the nursery right now for this interview. The house is getting a little bit busy these last couple of days, and this was my one place where I could be sure that we would have some quiet. So what's been my story for the last 32 years? Grew up in a family that valued science and public service. On my dad's side, we had a tradition of serving in the Roosevelt and Kennedy administrations. My grandmother used to talk about politics and about her service, and her family's service in politics is something she was proud of. And having every Sunday night dinner with her for years and years, that starts to stick with you as a little kid. On my mom's side, a legacy of science and of valuing expertise, of doing basic research, and of creating cures. And those two issues, to me, science and public service, are deeply intertwined. I think here in Massachusetts, that's particularly salient as we are the biomedical capital of the world, and as we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic in which a vaccine is going to be our best way out. Myself, I never had any direct desire to go into healthcare. After I graduated from Harvard in 2010, I joined the Marines. The Marines had sent my grandfather to college during the darkest hours of World War II, a poor, skinny, 17-year-old Jewish boy at a time when Jews were being exterminated globally, was sent to Purdue to study engineering by the U.S. Marine Corps. Changed his life, allowed him to achieve the American dream. And when I graduated from college in 2010, in the midst of the surge to Afghanistan, I felt like it was my turn to give back. Served a tour as a platoon commander in Helmand Province, served a tour as a special operations commander in Panama, came home, and like many Massachusetts Democrats, found myself to be an Obama-Baker voter. I supported Governor Baker's campaign in 2014. I think he's done a good job in COVID response, and he's demonstrated the kind of science-driven leadership and governance that we need in this crisis. I myself pursued public service at the local level as a city councilor in Newton over the last 5 years, been a leader on transportation, the environment, housing, immigration, education, issues that are deeply meaningful to me personally, and deeply meaningful to me politically as someone who wants to go to Congress and make real change, to reinvent transportation through a Green New Deal, to become a country that honors its immigrants as opposed to demonizes them, and to become a country where we have an inclusive and green economic recovery.
So that's a lot. That's a lot to do in Newton, and that's a lot to think about nationally. You got in early to this race. You didn't wait around for COVID to happen. Can you sort of walk us through your decision to get in the race, and then maybe just a minute or two about how you reflected on that decision when COVID broke out and the world of campaigning got very different very quickly?
I'm running for Congress because we're a nation in crisis. We were a nation in crisis in October when I first announced, because this president's dangerous and hateful agenda has divided us, has threatened our republic, and has set this country backwards both domestically and on the global stage. And the COVID pandemic has exacerbated that crisis and accentuated the stakes for 2020. We need people in Washington, D.C., who have led in crisis, who have led in collaboration, who have led through uncertainty. And in the Marines, in business, in local government, I've done all three of those things. I'm someone who knows how to get stuff done when the stakes are high and the stress is high. And I'll do so in the next term of Congress.
Another thing that maybe had been bubbling, but certainly hadn't exploded, was the Black Lives Matter movement. And of course, since George Floyd was murdered by 4 officers, we've had a lot of conversations in this country around the militarization of the police and police behavior, around racial justice. Give us some thoughts there. Tell us how you think we should move forward nationally on these issues, and maybe what you would do in Congress to help move us forward.
Well, this is an issue where, unfortunately, it's very easy to talk the talk, but we need people who can walk the walk. I've done so over the last 5 years as a city councilor in Newton, taken hard votes to create more housing in a city whose exclusionary zoning doesn't always line up with its progressive ideals. I've helped make Newton a more inclusive, welcoming place, which is why I've got the support of a broad array of housing and civil rights advocates from Newton. I've also taken the lead on police reform as the chair of public safety in Newton, helped push for an independent police reform task force, and have called out inappropriate incidents of racial profiling when I've seen them. Now, I've also talked more broadly at the national level about demilitarizing the police. And I want to put this in a context that I think is too often overlooked. After 9/11, 2 things started happening in this country that felt unrelated, but I think were deeply intertwined. One is we started asking our military to police people overseas. I was a veteran of that mission in Afghanistan. And at the same time, we started asking our police and our intelligence services to turn inwards and to take almost a counter-espionage tack towards the public sphere here at home. If you see something, say something. And there were threat codes everywhere, and airports felt like you were trying to enter a nuclear vault. And some of that was an appropriate response to heightened risk of terror, but some of it also seeped into our consciousness, into the way that we approach public safety, and to the point we've become an overly militarized public safety outfit here in the United States. We need to wind back both of these deleterious trends over the last 2 decades. One, we've got to end the forever wars in Afghanistan and Iraq and prevent a third war of choice in Iran. Secondly, we have got to reinvent public safety at the local level here in the United States. I think the Minneapolis experiment is one that we should all be looking at and looking to copy its successful elements. And I've been someone who's pushed for that at the local level here in Newton, as we have an independent police reform task force to look at how we can reimagine public safety.
Thank you, and I apologize to my viewers. As you know, we're doing this on Zoom, and sometimes the bandwidth cuts in and out a little bit. But as long as we've got your words, Jake, I think we'll stick with it. Thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit more about COVID, and specifically, since we're really thinking about you as a congressperson, we're thinking about 2021, and that's certainly going to involve jobs and economic recovery. And I know you've thought a lot about that. Can you share with us some of your ideas about what economic recovery looks like in our congressional district and how the federal government will play a part of that? We're going to get you unmuted.
Sorry about that. Am I breaking up on the feed?
You did for just a moment, but I think we're back.
Okay, I apologize for that. Every candidate in this race is talking about economic recovery through one lens only, which is the continued sending of federal funds to workers throughout the country. Now, that's an important element of it, but I think everybody realizes that's not a sustainable solution. What we need is a two-pronged sustainable effort. First, we need relief to local budgets so that they can continue to provide essential services ranging from waste management to education to infrastructure. I was talking to the mayor of Fall River last week, and taking out the trash right now is a challenge for their budget. That is a core essential service that, unless the federal government provides help, may be severely constrained. But then number two, we have to create jobs, and not the status quo jobs that existed before the pandemic that did not pay a living wage and then did not secure a dignified retirement. We need good jobs. And I've put forward a plan working with union leaders, with state elected officials, with leaders in science and business for a life sciences manufacturing roadmap to prosperity. Life sciences manufacturing in this moment, more than ever, is a growth industry. Small molecule, large molecule, antibiotics, medical supplies, huge growth industry. Massachusetts already has a lead in the R&D. Why shouldn't we have a lead in the manufacturing? And I've put forward a comprehensive plan for how we can create jobs there. It's one of the reasons I've got such a strong base of support in the South Coast that stands to benefit the most, from people like Representative Carol Fiola, Representative Pat Haddad, Representative Paul Schmid, local electrical workers out of Taunton.
So in addition to the economics, you did bring up healthcare, at least obliquely talking about the research. But tell us a little more about what healthcare should look like for folks like my family going forward, and how we're going to get there.
This issue is personal to me. My family is a healthcare family. As I mentioned, my dad is Tony Fauci's number 2 in Washington. My brother's on the front lines of COVID response at the MGH. My mom leads the Dana-Farber. My kitchen table growing up was the national healthcare debate from patient to provider. We talked about science, we talked about healthcare delivery, and as a family, we worked through illness together, including the lonely slide into Alzheimer's. I know this issue is complicated, and I think for any member of Congress, you've got to go to DC and to next term with some core principles that reflect the best interests of your constituents and the best interests of Massachusetts. Those 3 core principles to me are 1, healthcare is a human right. It's not a job perk. Being ill is scary enough without having to worry about going bankrupt because of it. Number 2, women must control their own reproductive decisions. That means fully funding and expanding Title X and Planned Parenthood and ending the global gag rule, making sure every woman in this country can control the decisions that she makes about her own body. And then number 3, investing in basic medical research and in the teaching hospitals that advance clinical care is the best way that we cure patients and an important driver of the Massachusetts economy. Any bill that can meet those 3 principles is a bill that I can get behind. I think our best option as a country is to build on the success and the potential of Obamacare, which never had a chance to succeed under 10 years of Republican obstructionism, and to put in a public option to strengthen the individual mandate and to lower prescription drug prices so we can finally make healthcare universally accessible and affordable.
Let's talk for a minute about education, which I know is also now personal to you. I see the books behind you. And I will tell you that spending the time reading them with your son will be really delightful when he starts mouthing the words and following along with his finger. My daughter has learned to read over the last year, and it's really wonderful. So look, education is important to me. It's important to society, and supporting public education and figuring out how to do it right is not always somehow so easy. So tell us again, from the federal government, how should the federal government be supporting public education?
I'm glad to hear that it gets fun to read as they get a little older. Right now, he's 3.5 months. And I got to say, we read to him all the time, and it's not that stimulating. Mostly just drools on them. The very first position I ever took when I ran for the city council in Newton was to expand pre-K and to get to full-day kindergarten. And I'm proud to say we made progress on both those fronts during my tenure. There is almost no higher impact investment that we as a country can make than to get kids ages 0 to 8 high quality cognitive and socio-emotional development. We know that brains at that age are very plastic. We know that we can really make a difference in kids' lives. And we as a country, frankly, should be embarrassed that as one of the wealthiest, most sophisticated economies in the world, 1 in every 5 kids in this country is food insecure, and many fewer kids than that many more kids than that do not have access to high quality early education or frankly high quality K through 12 education. The federal government has a number of roles to play in this. I'll highlight a couple. One, I fully support Joe Biden's call for expanded funding for early education. That's a no-brainer. We should have done that 25 years ago. Number 2, we should expand the earned income tax credit, probably the most effective anti-poverty program for kids ever devised in this country. And then number 3, we need to start thinking about schools as footprints for wraparound services. One of my mentors on education, Joan Wasser-Gish, has really put this point forward, that if a kid comes to school and doesn't have shoes, a kid comes to school and is afraid of gun violence, a kid comes to school and doesn't have secure housing, a kid comes to school and he's hungry, you don't refer them to a different agency, you don't bat them around. You provide those services on site because you already have the footprint to deal with it at the school level. That requires increased funding, and that requires, I think, a holistic understanding of the value of engaging with kids at the most vulnerable, but also the most high opportunity moments in their lives. And that means expanding SNAP benefits. That means making housing security a right for kids. That means taking on gun violence in a really, really hard-nosed way and treating it as a public health crisis as opposed to purely a criminal justice crisis.
So, I hate to pivot from schools to guns, but frankly, neither you nor I chose to make that our reality, and it is our reality. I'm from Brookline. I live in Brookline. Jake, you live in Newton. I grew up in a town called Brookfield, Connecticut, which is immediately adjacent to Newtown, Connecticut. And in fact, kids I went to school with had kids in that school in Sandy Hook on that day. And so it's absolutely personal to me. And when we talk about guns, I think, there's multiple facets, but there's the murders and the school shootings, and there's also the suicides. And so I'm hoping you can talk us through your thoughts on appropriate federal policy that deals with one or the other, or perhaps both.
It starts with 2 words: fewer guns. The evidence on this is absolutely overwhelming from a public health perspective, frankly, from an insurance perspective, from an education perspective. When you have fewer guns, there is fewer gun crime. Now, I was a Marine Special Operations officer. I slept 8 training patrol with an AR-15 for 4.5 years. No civilian needs to own a weapon of war. No civilian needs a high-capacity magazine. We've got to ban those weapons. We've also got to implement universal background checks, red flag laws, taking guns out of the hands of domestic abusers, mandating liability insurance. These are common sense gun safety proposals that have the broad support of the American people, and more importantly, that we know work to reduce gun violence in schools and elsewhere. Now, Democrats, I think, have not put together an effective enough coalition to talk about this message. I mentioned that these are popular proposals. If you poll Americans on universal background checks, the vast majority support it. Why can't we get this policy passed? We can't get this policy passed because we're sending the wrong messengers to talk about this. We need to put together a coalition of veterans, students, of leaders in the Black and Brown community, and of public health professionals to talk about gun safety in a way that is holistic and comprehensive. And in the Massachusetts 4th, which has a strong Moms Demand Action Network, which has a strong March for Our Lives network, where advocates in Boston and elsewhere have been talking about gun safety for 60 years, I can help quarterback that coalition and be a really effective lead messenger for gun safety for the Democrats.
Thank you. We've got a little bit of extra time, so I want to hit another issue or two. Jake, I know you're very thoughtful about transportation. And of course, the transportation needs in a place like Brookline and Newton is quite different than Fall River, which is, I'm sure, quite different than the towns halfway between. And I think transportation is one of those things where we think about our experience as the default experience. And if folks would just solve it for us, everybody would be in great shape. And probably that's not the case. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the federal role in getting us to and from where we want to go sooner, safer, lower cost, and maybe even less polluting.
I've worked in transportation in the private sector. I've worked in transportation in the public sector. This is an issue that I'm passionate about, and really which I launched my campaign on. And I encourage people who are interested to go to my website, jakeforma.com. They can read my transportation plan. I want to pull out a couple of issues. First, transportation and a Green New Deal are inextricably linked. 40% of the carbon emissions that drive climate change in Massachusetts come from the transportation sector. So if we're talking about a Green New Deal and we're not talking about transportation, then we're really missing the point and we're missing an opportunity. We need to reinvent transportation in Massachusetts. We need a new Eisenhower plan, but not for highways, for public transportation, all electric, free, regional rail, connected bus rapid transit, better infrastructure for cycling and walking. These are things that we know work. Cities like Copenhagen, Amsterdam, Tokyo, Seoul, Seattle, London, even New York have implemented facets of this and have had success. We're the scientific capital of the world. We are trained to do peer review, and yet we look around and can't see that we should adopt best practices from elsewhere. It's frankly a lack of political will. It's political failure. I put forward very actionable on-the-ground proposals for how we can coordinate federal, state, and local policyholders to put in all-electric regional rail and bus rapid transit. I know how to get this done because I've seen it at the local level, and I've prepared for it at the national level. The final point I'll make is that if we're not talking about transportation, we also can't really be talking about racial and economic justice. The air quality concerns, the commute times, the lack of opportunity and access to jobs are deeply embedded in a transportation infrastructure that was built post-World War II around white flight and exclusionary zoning. And until we really grapple with that, we're not going to fully redress those problems.
You brought up the Green New Deal, and I'm glad you did. We know that transportation is roughly a third of carbon pollution emissions nationally, at the very least. Another third is electric generation, and the final third is heating our buildings and the water in our buildings. Give us some of your vision there. You mentioned the Green New Deal. If you want to get into a few details, a few specifics, and perhaps as they relate to our district, I'd love to hear them.
Well, and Tommy, you're somebody I'd want to work with on this because you know a ton about energy. I know you and I have talked about nuclear power. We've talked about fossil fuel infrastructure. You're someone I think of as a mentor on this issue. And as a member of Congress, I'd certainly be ringing you up for advice. There's 7 different bills right now in Congress that would try to do carbon pricing and then use those funds in various means. And I think reasonable people can debate what the price per metric ton of carbon should be, how we should use those funds once they're garnered, how fast we should raise the price. But to me, the single most important thing is that we have got to put a price on carbon. We are not being serious as a country about carbon neutrality. We're not being serious about getting to a clean energy economy if we are not putting a price on carbon. I personally would like to see us price it relatively high and to use those funds, 1, to invest in green infrastructure, and 2, to rebate to working families who are struggling to recover after COVID.
Thank you. Jake, you mentioned earlier you had the endorsements of 3 of my colleagues, Rep. Schmid, Haddad, and Fiola, and I don't think any of the 3 would mind me saying that all of them are tough as nails. None of them are easy customers. So how did you butter them up? How is it that they came to endorse you?
Showing up and talking substance as opposed to rhetoric. As you said, these people are tough as nails, and they are fierce champions for their constituents, and they have a very low BS tolerance. What they want to see is who is going to be a partner for them, and more importantly, for their constituents in Washington, D.C. And that was a case I made over the course of the campaign by showing. I didn't just tell them, I showed up with policy, by engaging with their constituents on the issues that matter to them on the ground, and by proving to them that when they picked up the phone, they were going to have somebody on the other end who cared and who could get stuff done. So I've gotten stuff done in the Marines and local government and business.
I'll remember that next time I'm looking for them to co-sponsor one of my bills. Jake, we got about a minute left. Last words, last comments, anything you want to get across to the voters? Now's your chance.
We're a nation in crisis, and I don't think I need to convince anybody who's watching that of that right now. What I do hope to convey to you is that I am a leader who is crisis tested. I have led in combat. I have led in uncertainty in business. I have led through collaboration in local government. I am ready on day one. I am ready for the day after Trump to be a leader who will tear down his dangerous and hateful agenda and who will rebuild this country to the better angels of our nature.
Jakes, thanks for joining us today. We're filming, of course, on Brookline Interactive Group, Brookline's television program. Delighted to have you. Wish you the best of luck. Of course, viewers, the primary election is Tuesday, September 1st. You can vote by mail. You can vote day of. The general election is November 3rd. Vote by mail, vote day of, but make sure you get out and vote. Find the candidate that's right for you. And if you can, work for them a little bit. Make sure that their message is getting out there. I'm Tommy Vitolo. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next week. Be well, everyone.